Hi, I'm Robert Reich, and I want to talk to you about how our democracy is working and how it's not working. Now, some say American politics is gridlocked, but a tidal wave of politicians from both sides of the aisle, who just a few years ago opposed same-sex marriage, are now coming around to support it. Elected officials who had been against allowing undocumented immigrants to become American citizens are now talking about wanting to chart a path to citizenship for them. It's nice to think logic and reason are finally catching up with our elected representatives, but the real explanation for these changes of heart is far more prosaic. It's called public opinion. Polls show support for marriage equality at the highest level ever, with 58% of Americans in favor and 36% opposed. 7 in 10 Americans say there should be a way for people in the United States illegally to remain in this country if they meet certain requirements. And 90% support universal background checks before purchasing a gun. The exception is in the economic sphere, where public opinion seems, curiously, beside the point. Before January's fiscal cliff deal, for example, at least 60% of Americans expressed strong support for raising taxes on incomes over $250,000. But the deal, as you recall, locked in the Bush tax cut for everyone earning up to $400,000. Polls also show Americans would far prefer to raise taxes to reduce the budget deficit than to cut future Medicare or Social Security benefits, and yet the president has offered to cut future benefits. Now, I understand legislative deals require compromise, but why is it that deals over economic policy almost always compromise away what a majority of Americans want? Or to take another example, 65% of Americans want to raise taxes on large corporations. That's what the polls show. But both parties are heading in precisely the opposite direction. Half of Americans favor a plan to break up Wall Street's 12 megabanks, which control right now about 69% of the banking industry. Only 23% oppose such a plan, but what are our elected representatives doing? They won't even consider this kind of a plan. Our politicians are sensitive to public opinion on equal marriage rights and on immigration, and they are relatively sensitive on guns, but why are they tone deaf to what Americans want on the economy? That's because marriage rights, immigration, and guns don't threaten big money in America. By contrast, any tinkering with taxes or regulations sets off alarm bells in our nation's finally appointed dining rooms and boardrooms. Alarm bells that in turn set off promises of or threats to withhold large wads of campaign cash in the next election. When political scientists Benjamin Page and Larry Bartels surveyed Chicagoans with a net average worth of $14 million, they found their biggest concern was curbing budget deficits and government spending, ranking these as priorities 3 times as often as they did unemployment. And no surprise, these same wealthy individuals were also far less willing than our other Americans to curb deficits by raising taxes on high-income people, and more willing to cut Social Security and Medicare. They also opposed initiatives most other Americans favor, such as increasing spending on schools and raising the minimum wage above the poverty level. Now, the other thing distinguishing Page's and Bartels' wealthy respondents from the rest of America was their political influence. 2/3 of them had contributed money, an average of over $4,500 in the most recent presidential election, and 1/5 of them had even bundled contributions from others. That money bought the kind of political access that most Americans only dream of. About half of these wealthy people have recently initiated contact with a U.S. senator or representative, and nearly half, that is 44% of these contacts, concern matters of relatively narrow economic self-interest rather than broader national concerns. This is just the wealthy of one city. This is the survey just in Chicago. Multiply it across the entire United States, and you begin to see the larger picture of whom our representatives are actually listening to and why. Nor does this survey include the institutionalized wealth and economic clout of Wall Street and large corporations. Multiply the multiplier. So when it comes to issues like same-sex marriage, undocumented immigrants, and even guns, our democracy seems to be working fairly well. It's not perfect, of course. Certain special interest groups like the NRA still have outsized influence. But when it comes to economic issues that might affect the fates of large fortunes, American democracy is not functioning at all. Big money talks, and it's speaking more loudly now than ever. Thanks.